All right. For those of you just starting to join us, we're just going to get started here in just a quick minute. And if you want to go to the next slide, we were just going to leave it on that. Terrific. We'll get going here in just a couple of minutes. We've got a few minutes before 5. So thank you for joining us.
And if Jen clicks on the link I just forwarded to her, will she get into the meeting regardless?
Yes, that should work.
Okay.
And then Lucy can move her if we need her in the panelist.
I just clicked on that link, Sam, and it worked for me.
Great.
Cool. And I am.
Thank you so much. For those of you who just joined us, we are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. It's about 4 minutes to 5. So thank you for joining us, and we'll get started here in just a quick minute. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. Just a couple of minutes to 5. So thank you for joining us.
Music hold ended.
Thank you guys so much for joining. We're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. So thank you so much for joining.
All right, Julie, I think we get going.
Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all. And if you want to go to the next slide, thank you all so much for joining us for the second public meeting for Denver Moves Everyone. We're so excited to have you here. Little housekeeping to start off with. For those of you who might be interested in translating services, we're going to have real-time Spanish translation. So if you go to the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen, you'll be able to click on that and you could either select English or Spanish. Francisco, welcome. Would you like to introduce and let people know about how to get to your interpretation services?
Yes, thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos. Para escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, conectarse a través de la tableta de la computadora y pulsar el icono de globo abajo a la derecha en la pantalla y seleccionar, obviamente, español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. If you have any questions, put in chat as well. So for those of you on the phone, we are also super excited to have you. If you are interested in involving, we're going to ask a series of questions. We'll describe what's going on. We would love for you to hit *3 and you can contribute, you can answer questions, and you can ask as we move forward. So we're excited to have the folks on the phone, and we're excited to have the folks on the call on the Zoom call as well. If you are interested, if you're on the call and you are interested in joining us, feel free to log in through bit.ly, bit.ly, DMEPUBLIC So I apologize, I will put that in the chat as well. So thank you so much. Now we're going to get going right ahead. Anna, if you want to move to the next slide. So we've got quite a few presenters tonight. Want to just introduce our team here very quickly. We do have Jen Hillhouse, who is our brave leader here. She's the Director of Transportation and Mobility Planning. We also have Sam Piper, who is our project manager on the city side with DOTI. Afor Chavez, who is our Community Engagement Specialist. Alana Miller, our Climate Advisor. Evan Anderson, who's our technical project lead, and I am Julie Scheme, that I work on communications and outreach. So you're going to be hearing a little bit from each of us as we move forward here. And again, this is really, we've got some presentation material, but we're really hoping to hear from you. So you'll have an opportunity throughout this to engage with us. Again, hit *3 on your phone or include your information in the chat, and we would love to hear more. So next slide, please. So here's a rough idea of where we're going to go from. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is Denver Moves Everyone. I think that's an important place to start. What are our vision and goals for the plan, so you get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish? Then we're going to look to the future. What are the opportunities? What is it that Denver could look like in the future? And how do we plan for that? And then where do we go from here? And again, each of these sections, we're going to have questions. We're going to have an opportunity to chat with you, and we would love to hear your feedback. So we're very excited that you're here. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sam Piper, who's going to talk a little bit about what is Denver Moves Everyone.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, Julie. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of the members of the public who have joined us this evening to learn about Denver Moves Everyone, our long-range vision for the future of transportation here in Denver. My name is Sam Piper. I'm a transportation planner with DOTI, leading this project from the city side. And I'm joined, as Julie mentioned, by a host of individuals tonight to cover different aspects of this important project. And tonight we're going to be focused on demonstrating the feedback that we've gathered today to verify the vision for this plan as well as the goals, and really to think about our transportation future. So a lot could change, and this plan is looking out 30 years into the future, which is a long time, but it's really important for us to have a long outlook to determine how we need to make investments starting today that get us towards the goals that we will describe and determine tonight. So what will this plan accomplish? It's really that vision and the goals that we've been working with the community on developing for the past 6 months that we can then use to prioritize transportation investments in our city. And ultimately, that vision and goals framework will result in the development of a 6-year program of projects that we intend to implement. We have limited resources for how we implement projects, as well as programs and services that move people on our streets, as well as all of the things we need to do to operate and maintain our infrastructure as well. And so this framework will really provide us the information necessary to develop that program of projects that provides the maximum return of investment and moves the needle on the goals that we establish given our limited resources. And then looking out through the plan's horizon all the way out to 2050, what programs and policies, strategies do we need to have on board so that we continually make progress over the plan's horizon? What you'll learn tonight is that the future is uncertain. It's hard to plan for the future. And so it's, again, really critical why we're doing this effort now. And so we'll work together tonight to understand what changes might be on the horizon and what you think about those futures so that we can make sure we're planning for the right transportation system over the plan's 30-year vision. And so, we just want to really underscore why it's so critical to plan. And the bottom line here is that transportation plans that the city of Denver leads do lead directly to projects and those programs and services that move people, goods and services on our streets. And so we have numerous mobility plans that the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure leads, whether it be for sidewalks, for transit, or for our bicycling infrastructure. And Denver Moves Everyone is unique in that it looks across all of the different needs of our streets, as well, the infrastructure that moves people, as well as the operational and maintenance needs that we have to keep our streets in good condition. And so Denver Moves Everyone is really our system-wide approach to prioritizing improvements across all of the needs that our system has so that we can maximize how we're investing and making the most progress on the goals that we establish through this effort. And the project is really divided into 4 major phases. We kicked off with all of you, with the public, in the summer of this year, and we're moving into the second phase of the project. So we'll talk tonight about how we have set and established our vision and goals for the plan with feedback collected from all of you. And now we're moving into this finding the path forward. What could the future look like? And what do we want the future to look like so that we can shape strategies, programs, and projects to get us the transportation system we want? So that's really what the conversation tonight is focused on. This plan is going to November to the fall of next year. And so just keep in mind that we'll keep asking you for your feedback over the next 2 plan milestones. When we get to that prioritization and trade-off conversation, we fundamentally can't invest in everything. So we need to understand where should we prioritize our investments to get the most out of how we spend our resources. And then the final phase of the project will be wrapping up Denver Moves Everyone and really focusing on how we can track the progress of the plan's implementation. So please keep an eye out for future opportunities to participate. But tonight, we're focusing on our transportation future. And just wanted to emphasize that denvermoveseveryone.com is really the base for our communication for this project. And it is in addition to our strategies to meet people in person and have pop-up events and things of that nature. But this is really our one-stop shop for information about Denver Moves Everyone. And we have similar information that we're going to be talking about on this web tool. And so we encourage you to share this link with your friends, family, and neighbors. And it's a fun way to think about what could change in the future. And we really need your feedback both tonight and through this tool, and helping us to share this across your networks.
Terrific. Thank you much. We have a quick question on the chat. When these initiatives end, and we're at the end of the project, how do you measure success? How does accountability work? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Totally. So through Denver Moves Everyone, we're going to be establishing a series of benchmarks which we can track to demonstrate if we are making success on the recommendations that we develop through this plan. So we're working hard on establishing our first major deliverable for the project, which is the Denver Moves Everyone State of the System report, where we're looking across all the goal areas that Afor will speak about tonight and using data to demonstrate how are we doing on a mobility front, on a safety front, when it comes to sustainability, the impact of our transportation system on climate change and things of that nature. And so all of those data points that we establish for how our system operates today will then, they can be translated into benchmarks so that we can track progress on them. And so this is a performance-driven plan, and one of the key outcomes is fundamentally to have that system of benchmarks that we can use to track success.
Terrific. Wonderful. And then I've got one more quick question for you, and then we're going to go into our next little segment here. We have a question from David on the chat. You know, we set transportation priorities in Denver, right? And yet DOTI is spending $88 million to expand the I-25 and Broadway Highway interchange, which goes against those priorities. How would this plan better enforce our priorities when you get to the budgeting process?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. And we really want to demonstrate, you know, as an agency, we haven't done a strategic transportation plan since 2008. And so through this plan, we want to really verify what our values and our goals are, which we've worked with the community over the past 6 months in building from that Denver Right framework, but so that we can reinforce when it comes to transportation investments, which projects align with those values and which aren't aligned with them. And so we really do feel like going into the future, the Denver Moves Everyone framework of vision and goals will be used to screen projects and prioritize them into the future.
Terrific. Thank you. And again, if you're on the phone, hit *3. You can ask us any questions as well. I'd like to take a quick minute and share with you some thoughts we've had on transportation from some of our Denver constituents. Anna, would you like to play?
My full name is Baruki Ruiz Blanco. I grew up in the East Side and then in Montbella.
My name is Joella Ballman, and I live in South Denver or Lowry.
My name is Mayra Viña, and I live here in Five Points.
My name is Antonio Casper Valenzuela, and I live in the Five Points area. My family has been in Colorado since the late 1600s.
My name is Sedona Allen Moreno. I've been in this neighborhood of Marley, Westwood area my whole life.
Right now, I definitely drive to and from work. It's just not very feasible or realistic to take any other means.
Thankfully now I have a car. Gosh, I can just remember days I spent maybe a good 6 hours of my day on the bus just trying to get around.
If I can ride my bicycle, I'll ride my bicycle to places or use the light rail because it is more consistent. And with my bike, I get to see more of Denver. I get to see more of my community that I live.
Catching a light rail or a bus or the train even to the airport, it's really convenient because you don't have to deal with people driving. But when catching the bus as a family, as a child, as a kid, there's a lot of obstacles. Accessibility of public transportation is vital to thousands in this area.
There is a lot of great things about taking the bus. It gives me time to reflect. I am grateful to have those possibilities to sometimes not drive.
Improving transportation means access for everybody, which includes some type of equity.
Make it more accessible, make it more affordable, just making it easier to get from out here in the Montbella or Green Valley area to downtown or different areas.
I would love to see the city have more lights at the bus stops especially, or also coverage.
I think having some more frequency would make people to want to take the bus because they know they're not, going to be waiting 30+ minutes. We are facing, a dire climate crisis that is going to impact our current and future generations. So how can we make sure that all different communities, are really getting what they need to be able to get around with ease?
I think accessible brings in the diverse needs our community needs, and also that it may lead to more equitable changes for our families.
It's important to me because I have 500 family members in a mile radius of this area. So all of them, their kids, they're gonna have to use the bus, they're gonna have to drive. It affects us all because we own houses here, we live here.
When we're thinking about what we could add to make transportation in Denver better, the more that we can enter this dream space and really envision together as a community what would make it better, the more that we can really strive towards those goals.
I think the more people we get to hear from, the better that we'll be at this.
Great. Thank you so much. For those of you on the phone, that was just some clips of some local Denverites talking a little bit about their transportation experience. And now we'd love to hear a little bit about yours. Hit *3 if did you resonate with what you heard on the video, or do you have other opportunities, or have you had different experiences when you're traveling around the city? We would love to hear your feedback. And we also can take a quick minute and answer any additional questions about the Denver Moves Everyone planning effort. So any thoughts? Again, hit *3 to provide your comments to us, or feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. So just curious what you thought of that video. What did you think? It looks like we've got some good questions coming in for the phone, which is great. We're looking forward to seeing those. Any thoughts on what you just heard? Did that resonate with you? Out of curiosity. Well, you keep thinking about it. Oh my gosh, we have a person. Oh, we have somebody who's relating to that. Used to travel 6 hours a day on the bus. We're feeling for you on that one. We have a question. How are you going to get people out of cars? I think that's an excellent question. Sam or Evan, how are you thinking this plan would tie to that?
Sorry, Julie, one more time.
You bet. We've got a question from the phone of, will this plan, is it going to help us get people out of cars?
Yeah, so Denver has grown by 100,000 people in the last 10 years, and we're projected to keep growing. And so if everyone still travels predominantly by vehicle, we can anticipate that congestion and all of the factors, safety, climate, and the environment could continue to get more challenging. And so through Denver Moves Everyone, it's really a plan about providing more transportation choices to make it easier to walk, to bike, and to take transit, and to determine what are the barriers that people face today that they don't choose to walk or bicycle or take the bus. To the comment in the chat, spending 6 hours per day on the bus versus people who do drive, who probably don't spend that much time in a vehicle per day. And so this plan is really focused on providing more transportation options and figuring out what it's going to take to make those more realistic, convenient, and affordable options for more people, so that not as many people need to drive for basic services, to get to the grocery store, to walk to the park, and remove those barriers that prevent people from taking transit by making it faster, more reliable, and convenient. So this project is really focused on providing more transportation choices.
Terrific. Thank you, Sam. We're getting some great feedback in the chat. Hit *3 if you want to share from the phone. I agree. We have some person that doesn't relate to 6 hours on the bus, but thinks that's just terrible. And we need to really think about more frequent service. That's excellent feedback. We also have comments about, how much harder it is when you think transportation and when you're running to the school or errands, if you have young children. I think that's a lot trickier. A lot of interest in safety. It really specifically, if you watch, there's an example from 12th and Garfield, cyclists running at full speed. How do we deal with the roundabouts may be insufficient width? So there's definitely a concern we're reading from safety, which I think is excellent. Robbie, definitely hear your comments about pedestrian cyclists. So we can't just take the perspective of the car. We need to be thinking about those individuals that are walking as well and using other modes of transport. So these are excellent feedback. All of this we are capturing, and we're going to be using it to inform our next deliverables on this. So we really appreciate your sharing. We also talk about making sure that we have rail lines in the right places, and a lot of themes about making it easier to walk, which I think that's a really important message for us to hear. Again, it's not all about cars. So keep your great thoughts coming in. We're going to move on, Anna, to the next slide. This is great feedback. Thank you. Keep it all coming in. So I'd like to have you present a little bit and talk about our vision and goals for the project.
Yeah, sure. And I'm loving seeing some of the chat comments and questions coming in. So thanks for keeping engaged with us. I do get the exciting job of talking about the vision for Denver Moves Everyone and the goals that you all helped to create and helped us to finalize. So let's get to the next slide, and I'll just jump in and talk a little bit about the process of how we got to where we're at, and talk a little bit about who we heard from and how we were able to get these goals and these visions finalized. And I know that there's a lot of people on the phone, so I'll try to be descriptive and do as much as I can to help you visualize some of the things that other people are seeing on the screen. So we started the Denver Moves Everyone process, really launched this in the summer, early summer, late spring. And we went out to the community and asked people, what do you value about transportation in Denver? Really wanted to get a sense of how you vision the future of transportation in our city. And so it's been an iterative process of taking that feedback, those values, your visions, using a lot of our internal knowledge and working with different teams to draft goals and visions that we then brought back to the community and asked, are we missing anything? How are these resonating with you? And then we came back internally with different stakeholder groups, focus groups, diverse committees, and have been able to finalize these goals and our vision statement that will be, as Sam mentioned, published in our State of the System report here shortly. So it's really been iterative. We've gotten a lot of feedback from you all. We really appreciate your involvement in the engagement tool so far and in all of our street team events. So how did we do this? How did we get out there and get all this feedback and gather all the input that helped us to formulate our values and our goals? And in combination with our engagement tool, which you'll hear a little bit more about later, that's been updated with some new opportunities for engagement and feedback. In combination with that, we hit the streets. We had street team folks out there going to different community events. We went to rec centers and parks and the Denver Days events at the end of the summer. We were at libraries, school events, and we were making sure that we were really hitting a lot of the neighborhoods that we don't typically hear from and that we know are typically less likely to engage online. So through those efforts, our street team efforts, our online tools, we heard from thousands of residents, and we're really excited to say that we were able to hit residents and gather feedback from residents in every single one of Denver's 78 neighborhoods. And so while we were out there and on the tool, what was the main question? What was the feedback that we got? So we really asked one question, and we were asking people in one word to tell us what their vision for transportation, the future of transportation in Denver is. And you can see here, we've got some surveys, and we received over 300 inspiring, really motivational, creative words that we were able to drill down and get some really consistent themes. So safe was one of the big words that we heard a lot, and we continue to hear that. We're seeing a lot of that in the chat now and in the conversations we're having tonight. Sustainable, equitable, and people-oriented were some of the big keywords and themes that we heard from residents and from a lot of our partners and groups that we worked with. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more. So the vision that we were able to develop, again, this is really our statement that is able to help us to see what the future for our vision of transportation in Denver looks like. And so Denver moves everyone and everything with respect and care. Denver is a city of safe streets connected by sustainable mobility options, providing equitable access and opportunity for the people who need it most. So hopefully everybody on their phone was able to hear that vision statement that all of you, our community members, helped to create. So we're really happy and proud to be able to take that and move that forward. In the same process, in developing our vision and understanding what we value, we're able to also develop the goals for DME. And so if we go to that next slide, we'll see what the 5 goal areas and themes are that came out of those conversations in our tool. And we have mobility, safety, sustainability, community, and quality. And these goals really emphasize the desired result through the Denver Moves Everyone plan. And as Sam said, we're able to set metrics that really relate to these and help us to decide and see how we are being successful against our vision. Throughout the process, we obviously heard that social and racial equity is really an important theme and value amongst our communities, our city. And so that is a consistent theme that you'll see here that's connected and tied into each one of our goals and really supports those goals. Along with equity, we also heard public health, technology, transportation, and economy were also very important themes and areas that we needed to maintain focus throughout all of our goals. So if you go to the next slide, Again, throughout this process, we drafted our goals, took them back to community and said, hey, are your values reflected in these goals? And almost 100% of people, as you can see, agreed that the values that they have for transportation in Denver were reflected in the draft goals that we did share with community members. So for people on the phone, 42% of people agreed, 49% of people strongly agreed, and then 9% of people didn't feel like maybe their values were reflected in the goals. We did hear some really great feedback from some of our committees, especially our diverse and inclusive committees, that there were some key themes that were missing. So on the next slide, you can see that we've added affordability. So when you're talking about mobility, there was really some desire to hear more about affordability and how that connects with the goal of mobility. And then when we're talking about safety, we were hearing that comfort is a theme that really needs to be incorporated there. And education when it comes to sustainability. And then staying in place was a theme that we wanted to incorporate into community goal. And then community assets was a theme, an important area that we wanted to focus on when we're talking about quality. So again, these goals have been to a point now we're going to be able to add them into our state of the system along with the Denver Moves Everyone vision statement. So we applaud everybody who has been a part of this process so far for your input and helping us to get these statements and these goals and vision together. And we continue to have opportunities for you to be involved and stay along with us in the process. So I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Sam now for our next step.
So I think I'm jumping in here, Sam.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Julie.
No, that's all right. So hit again on the phone, hit *3. We would love to hear your questions. Also, feel free to put your questions in the chat. So let's go to the next slide. So as we've talked, we are looking into the future and we're looking way into the future. This is a plan that we're thinking about now for the next 30 years. And I get that that's hard, right? There's a lot going on right now in the world. And so sometimes it's hard to put yourself in this sort of future looking place when there's so many things that are right in front of us. But it's really, really important. And the way way we can demonstrate the importance of this is looking back. So if we look at our history and we look at the decisions that were made all throughout the history and how they have had a tremendous impact on the way our communities have developed and evolved over time, you see the importance of putting some proactive thought into where we want to go. Because if you look at the past, these decisions have really influenced where we are today. So what an amazing opportunity to work together to figure out how we can make decisions that are going to improve and get us to where we want to be in the future, especially with the goals that Afford just identified. So looking backwards a little bit to look forward. We talked about our tool. Anna, if you want to bring it up here. So denvermoveseveryone.com. This is our online tool. We would love for you to get on. It's got some fun interactive questions. It's going to cover some of the similar materials that we're going to cover tonight. But what I wanted to highlight very quickly is it also has a very interesting section to provide you a little bit of this history. So for those of you on the phone, you can go on denvermoveseveryone.com and see this. What we're showing you is a map. And as you zoom into the map, you can say, gosh, this is where I live. And then you'll see different circles of different colors. So transportation, community, water, and parks are sort of our four historic themes. And you can go in the tool. It's really great fun. You can go and click on these icons in your area and learn a little bit about the history of Denver and some of the decisions that have made and the things that have really influenced how we got here today. So I'll just highlight one very quickly, Colfax. Colfax designation as US 40. So in the 20s, it was designated as a cross-country highway, and it was very, very automobile focused. So the origination of Colfax was always focused about getting vehicles and automotive vehicles through this area and allowing a lot of parking and a lot of access. However, what has resulted in that over time is we are now in a situation where this is an area with a lot of crashes. We have it listed as one of these areas of concern for us because of the city's traffic deaths associated with this. So now the city is taking a look at a planning study for a bus rapid transit to basically take Colfax and put more multimodal solutions on that corridor. So that's just one of many, many examples that we have all across the city. But again, it gives you that idea of the decisions that were made to structure Colfax the way it was have resulted in our situation today where we're worried about some of the safety issues with that. And the city is now proactively trying to address that. So what is it that we should be thinking about now to make sure that we are addressing and we're setting ourselves up for the future that is going to meet the goals that you helped us develop? So that's sort of looking backwards to look forward. So going back to the presentation, if you guys are thinking historically, we would love to hear, if you could go back in time, is there anything you would change, especially from a transportation or a planning perspective? Anything that you are aware of that you're thinking of? A great example would be, and we've heard before of that, streetcars. We used to have more robust streetcars through the system that we no longer have. And now we're trying to reinstate some of that with our transit program. So let us know if you have any thoughts. Hit *3 on your phone. Keep the streetcars. I like it. If there's any other things that you're thinking of when you look historically, anything that you would go back and change. So I'll give you guys just a quick second on that because we'd love to hear your thoughts. So definitely have a quick question in the meantime. Sam, I think this is probably a question for you. Is there any way we can accelerate the BRT process, especially along Colfax?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So through Denver Moves Everyone and our complementary planning effort, Denver Moves Transit 2.0, we are looking at opportunities to accelerate our significant investment in making a better transit system. These projects fundamentally are expensive, but we're trying to get a better sense of what it's going to take to transform those streets and make transit operate much better. Bus rapid transit, for folks that are less familiar with that term, is a series of strategies that prioritize transit buses specifically along a roadway by providing a dedicated space, enhanced bus stops, as well as advantages at signals so that they can move faster and really be competitive to driving along those corridors. They've had great success in other cities and they're less expensive than implementing light rail lines. And so through Denver Moves Everyone, we're understanding where those transit investments would have the greatest impact on connecting people to jobs and the places they want to go, and also understanding the costs of those improvements so that we can stage all of the necessary phases of a project that are critical, such as doing a conceptual design, doing what we call final engineering, which is really detailing what it's going to take to implement that project, and then understanding when the construction would take place. And I recognize those are a lot of steps, but what we're trying to do is get a better plan of action to stage those critical steps so that we can fundamentally move large investments forward faster.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Another question maybe for Alana. Are you thinking about turning some streets into parks or bike ped transit ways, looking at expanding our greenways? Alana, could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. And for whoever asked that question, I think what we're hearing a lot in the chat here and from feedback is that sustainability and green space is really important for people, that it not only provides a place for people to bike and walk, but just a better feeling of quality of life and makes our city enjoyable. So I think that's definitely something to look into. How do we provide more spaces? And that might be rededicating some spaces that are in our right of way, and we could reimagine what they look like.
Terrific. Thank you. A lot of great comments again. Hit *3 if you'd like to comment on the phone. Keep the streetcars. I like it. This is news to me. Run cars on peanut oil, which is what they started before fossil fuels. That's really interesting. Underground trains back when we had a little bit more space. That would have been a very proactive thing to do. Let's see. A good point from David. We shouldn't talk about undoing past mistakes. We should be looking at making positive decisions moving forward. So I think that's a good lesson for us as we're moving forward, as we're looking backwards. What can we do to make sure that we're making the right decisions moving forward? So appreciate that thought, David. Another comment from Emily, if I could go back in time, I'd build sidewalks citywide and budget for their maintenance. So I think we are getting a lot of comments on the chat around maintenance. So that is definitely something we will take into consideration as well as we move forward. So let's see. I think with that, I think we'll move to the next section. So we're going to talk a little bit about where can we go from here. So this is our opportunity, as we're saying, we're looking toward the future. How do we make those? How do we make these decisions, and how do we frame this discussion? So, Evan, I'd like you to walk us through this next piece a little bit.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for all the great comments and chats coming in. We do think it's helpful to look back at the past and some of those perhaps mistakes, so that when we are looking to the future, we can really think about how we really can achieve the goals and everything that you've described here tonight. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Denver might look like in 2050, and then hear a little bit more from you about how you might experience that. So one way that Denver Moves Everyone is really producing a really transformative plan is our scenario development process. What we're doing is really looking out to 2050 so that we can understand some of the uncertainties out there and build that into our planning process so we can advance BRT, build more sidewalks, make safer streets, and really transform how we move. Again, this is really enabling us to develop that transformative plan that prioritizes all the great planning investment that's already done. So a little bit about how we did that. Over the past couple of months, hearing from comments such as this on the phone tonight, through a number of our different avenues online, and those surveys that really are still important. We've gathered great input on really what we think we should be considering and thinking about in the future in 2050. Really kind of looking at what was people's vision for the future of transportation. What were some of the opportunities and threats that we were hearing that might be coming up on the horizon? And what are some of those things that are changing in the world around us that we ought to be considering in our planning process? We really received great input and great, fantastic ideas. And we took all of that comment back and really kind of boiled it down into what we're calling drivers of change. These are some of the forces that will shape our world over the next 30 years. We heard from many of you that things like how we travel, how we're responding to changes around us are going to be more important to consider. We heard a lot about social and racial justice and just how important it was to make Denver's transportation system equitable and accessible for everybody. It's hard to talk about the future and not think about the impacts of technology and how that's really changing how we travel and how we access different transportation services. We also heard many comments from many of you about just looking back at the last 10 years in Denver and the tremendous change and transformation and what that might happen if that continues. Certainly the climate crisis that we're facing was really kind of emerged as a top value and certainly a top potential uncertainty or that might shape Denver in the future. And then finally, kind of conversations around mode shift, particularly transit. What would happen if we did have that fast and frequent service that we're all looking for? How might that change Denver's future? We took all of those drivers of change and really took that input and developed 4 different plausible futures for the future of Denver in 2050. This really looked at changing assumptions about how we might change and transform as a future in terms of our infrastructure and our development patterns. So how might our city change around us? And in turn, we also looked at how might our travel behavior change in response to some of those infrastructure changes. And really, we're going through this process of understanding our different potential paths for Denver so that we can really answer that question of how do we achieve that ambitious transportation goal of transforming the way we move? How do we respond to continued rapid population growth, the safety challenges, new evolving needs for different types and modes of transportation, for e-commerce? How do we achieve those equity goals and address our climate crisis overall? So this process is really fundamental in answering those questions and looking at how the investments and the pathways that we as a city can make can really help achieve those goals, no matter how the future turns out. So we're looking at, again, 4 different futures. We're going to talk a little bit more about those this evening. We just do want to reinforce that we're not planning for any one of these futures. In reality, the future might very well be a blend of each of these, or something entirely that we're not thinking about. But by thinking about that uncertainty and the different plausible paths that are out there, we can, again, develop the best paths, the best investments, the best policies that'll really help us achieve everything we've heard from you all tonight. So that's overall our scenario development process. What we'd like to now kind of hear directly from you about each of those 4 futures. Some of our presenters tonight are going to talk a little bit about, again, these different plausible paths for Denver in 2050. And we realize 2050 is a long ways out, and 30 years from now may seem like a distance away. But it's really critical to start planning for the next generation of Denverites, because the youth right now that are just learning to walk will be turning 30 and 40 in 2050. And we want Denver to be as bright and brilliant and welcoming for them as it is today. So we'd like to walk through each of these futures and just imagine yourself in this future. Imagine what it might be like for your family, your friends, and again, that next generation. We'll start with introducing our first future, which is really, we asked ourselves the question, what if we don't change course? What if we continue to travel the way we do today? What might Denver in 2050 look like in that scenario? In this scenario, we really do assume that we haven't made those transformational investments that we all know and desire, and that we do continue to travel mostly by car. Certainly there's options for walking and biking and transit, but they may not be what we want them to be. This status quo and the kind of current trends that we're on really do have significant implications for safety and sustainability. Again, everything we've heard from you all tonight really does present a continuing challenging overall. Again, this isn't a future we're planning for, but it's important for us to recognize what happens if we don't change, if we don't transform. Back to you, Julie.
Terrific. So questions first. What do you think about this scenario? Do you have any questions about it? And Anna, let's actually go back and highlight the scenario itself. So do you have any questions about it? Does it make sense? And then what we'd love to hear is what is interesting, what's exciting to you about this future, and what could be challenging do you see? So again, hit *3 if you're on the phone. And yes, we have a future generation right there with Evan. So let us know, hit *3 if you're on the phone or into the chat. We'd love to know, what do you think about the status quo future? And while we're waiting for those comments to come in, we do have a question. I think this would be a good Sam question. Is it possible that for DOTI to turn every 5th street into a bicycle and non-car street throughout the city? So to actually have corridors within the city that we don't allow cars on, is that something that's being considered?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we're evaluating through Denver Moves Everyone is that fundamentally, we need to prioritize some streets to move people and understand where those streets should be. Through the pandemic, folks may be aware, for the first time, we really changed the way that streets operate to prioritize people walking and bicycling. And we found that what we called our shared street program was really successful. Travel speeds and vehicles went down, and the numbers of people walking and bicycling went way up. So the pandemic did provide us that opportunity. And I think through, based on your feedback, those are the big ideas. I think in the video, somebody said, let's get in that dream state to think about what the future could look like. And if that's what you want us to consider, we can definitely evaluate big changes in the way that our street system looks and feels versus today.
Terrific. Thank you, Sam. Great comment from Pete. If you're thinking about, the trends going on in Denver right now, one of them is that our city is aging. The individuals who live here are getting older. And so especially under the status quo, could we have a situation where the city is actually less accessible, where there are seniors really have to live in car, that basically have to drive to get around because they don't have other options, and, get to a certain age where maybe that's unsafe. So thank you, Pete, for sharing that. That's a great thing to think about under the status quo. Let's see, what else? Status quo, air pollution, more traffic deaths, more homelessness, aging infrastructure. So it seems like from what we're seeing on the chat, this is, continuing the way we are, that it seems like there should be opportunities, and we need to be thinking about, as Sam said, those big ideas as we move forward. So thank you for that feedback. See other comments? Oh, go ahead, Sam, please.
Oh, just thinking about that air pollution through Denver Moves Everyone in the State of the System report, we're really demonstrating what impact transportation has on both climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as air pollution. Alana, I don't know if maybe you could just speak a little bit about those contributions, just as other people are communicating. It's been something that we as an organization haven't really crunched the numbers on, but this report will really publish that. Alana, could you speak about those factors a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Yes, so transportation plays a major role in air pollution and climate pollution. In Denver, it's the leading cause of air pollution and the second leading cause of climate pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And most of that does come from personal vehicles. So addressing how people get around the city, the types of cars people are driving, and whether or not they have to drive or could take more sustainable modes will really help improve our air pollution problems, which we saw so clearly over the last couple summers, as well as our impact on the climate.
Great, thank you, Alana. Also, a really great comment in the chat. Something we need to be aware of is the status quo could perpetuate existing inequities. So I think that's a good point. Without some conscious effort to maybe change some of the ideas and our policies around transportation and priorities, we could be in a situation where we're exacerbating inequities. So I think that's a really good observation as well. Again, hit *3 if you're on the phone. We would love to hear your thoughts on the status quo scenario. With that, we're going to move on to our next, which I believe is, I'm trying to remember, new normal?
Off-4, yes, and that's mine.
Excellent.
All right, so yeah, our second kind of future scenario that we will be discussing is the new normal. So remember the pandemic, it wasn't that long ago, and we're still experiencing some of those same trends that we experienced during the pandemic today. So we asked ourselves, what if a lot of those trends that we saw accelerated? So in 30 years, we're seeing some of those same trends that we saw during the pandemic existing and accelerating at that time. So we can move into that slide in the description there. So thinking a lot about people who worked from home during the pandemic, and in this new normal future that we're laying out here, that would be something that's pretty common as well. So more people working from home, more people ordering goods and services online, and travel choices would change. So not a lot of people were taking the bus as much. And so that transit option would be more limited in this new normal type of future scenario. One thing that we saw with, as in respect to safety, was that there weren't as many cars on the road, but the cars that were on the roads were going faster, and there were some pretty significant crashes and incidents that we saw during that time period. So that's something that we have to consider in this situation as well, in this type of future scenario. The other thing that one of our panelists, or one of the attendees, dropped into the chat is the inequities and the question that we just brought up. And so in this new normal scenario, are we looking at people who don't have access to online services and working from home? That could exacerbate some of the inequities that we see there as well. So this is some of the thoughts and the descriptors here that we have for the new normal scenario. Cars are cleaner, but driving still contributes to that climate change. And then new funding for transportation means Denver can't keep up with those needed repairs. So that's the new normal future that we're looking at here, that we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions around.
Terrific. So what do you think of the new normal? Any questions about that? Starting off, just making sure you're following sort of our thought process on this. And then again, what do you think, what would you be looking forward to? What do you think would be a positive, your sort of favorite aspect if we looked forward to the new normal? And what would be things you would be concerned about under this potential scenario? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Couple comments in the chat wanted to highlight. Good point. There was a comment about air pollution obviously being exacerbated by the wildfires. I think we all sort of recognize that after this summer. I think that's a good point. However, then we have some other comments that say, but our transportation and land use policies are contributing to this because we have some of the highest per capita emissions in the world. So yes, the wildfires are exacerbating it, but we do have a fundamental issue from an air quality perspective when it comes to transportation. So I think that's a really good point. Another feedback from Benjamin, I like this comment. He's saying, it can't be one or the other, doesn't want to feel locked in that our status quo will automatically assume that we can't adjust for sustainability. And just a reminder with these scenarios, again, we're not choosing one of them. We're not saying this is the future. What we're trying to say is here are ways the future can play out so that we can start thinking about how would we achieve our goals under any of these future scenarios. So again, these are plausible scenarios, not trying to pick one, not trying to say this is where we're trying to get, but saying, here's what the future could look like. How do we achieve our goals under all these different scenarios? So just as a quick reminder, so appreciate your feedback on that. I love Emily. I dream of being able to comfortably walk and bike to my doctor, the store, coffee, library, etc. The new normal is not going to help that. So I appreciate that feedback. But you'll like a couple of other scenarios that might open that up a little bit more. I think we do have a lot of feedback on bike ped and transit friendly, that's a lot of the folks that may be engaging with us. But there may be a concern that the silent majority or individuals that maybe don't participate with us enough really might want to, focus on the car piece of that. So maybe Sam, I'll throw that one to you for a second. So, in looking at this, obviously we are thinking about sustainability and we are thinking about air quality, but how are we thinking about it for an individual that likes their car and still wants to be able to access downtown? How are we balancing all of that in your mind?
Absolutely. Even with benchmarks that we've established today, we recognize that driving will continue to be a fundamental way that people move in Denver into the future. But I think that the real sentiment of that question is how do we motivate more people to potentially not drive as much? And so what research does suggest is that when you provide better options for travel, when transit is more competitive and when walking and bicycling, you've got more complete networks and places are closer together and you can access them more easily, then people do replace trips with walking, bicycling, and taking the bus or taking the train. A good example that Denver has invested in is, think about the A-line expansion to the airport and the opportunities that provided to neighborhoods to take the train to the airport. Now, that level of service doesn't exist everywhere, so it doesn't provide access to every neighborhood in the same way. So that's just a demonstration of by making an investment in some areas, we can provide a competitive travel option that does make it easier than driving and going to the airport, paying for parking for multiple days and all of that. So really through Denver Moves Everyone, we want to evaluate what is it going to take to motivate more people to have transportation choices? What are those barriers that exist today? Is it safety? Is it comfort? Is it convenience? Is it travel time? Is it the fact that some folks may have a family? And then really make those investments in the places where it will have an impact on travel choice. And I think a theme of tonight, as well as we've heard earlier, is eliminate those inequities and provide the right transportation options in those neighborhoods that may rely more on walking, taking transit or bicycling to complete more trips, and really matching up the right transportation infrastructure to enable people to have better access across the city.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Sam. Lots of other great comments coming in, really appreciate it. *3 on your phone if you're on the phone and like to engage with us. Interesting comments about a little bit of a chicken and the egg discussion. So are the buses infrequent because there's low ridership, or is there low ridership because the buses are not coming frequently enough? So I think that's a good point. So there's some discussion on the chat about, needing to lean in and maybe provide some of these modes so that to retrain behavior and give people these opportunities, just as Sam was talking about. So appreciate that feedback. Yeah, little comment that, shoot, if there was an electric bus that passed my, by my neighborhood every 10 to 15 minutes, I would absolutely use it. And so seeking opportunities to proactively provide those additional options. Afore I might get your thoughts on this one. We have an interesting comment that says the new normal could push more growth out of Denver proper to the suburbs as people are less tied to the city center, and which could result in higher emissions, wasteful land use, inequities, things like that. I don't know if before you had any thoughts on that under this particular scenario.
Well, I can say that I was sitting here looking at that comment. I had it highlighted because that is something that, we've thought a lot about, particularly as planning, and designers are trying to create a city where everybody can access the things that we need kind of in a little closer area. And so as we start to see, in this scenario, as people are moved out, I think that's a really good point. And I think Alana can talk a little bit too about what that would do for our health of our environment and emissions. And I think it's a great point. That's something that I've considered a lot too. We were going through these discussions, and that's something that came to my mind is, what does that mean for local business? What does that mean for being able to really have that closer community in that city center? So something that we've really considered and thought about too. And I know that it's important as we plan out our cities to make sure that we have the access that people need and create communities where people really feel connected. So I don't know if Sam or Alana has anything else they want to add to that comment.
Yeah,
Right,
I would
looks like
agree with that. If folks don't need to necessarily be in downtown or don't need to access their corner store, that they might start making different decisions about where they live. And that does make it a lot harder to take the bus or to walk somewhere. So I think that's an important consideration for this scenario and the ripple effects that it would have on our local economy and the feel of our streets.
Terrific, thank you. Evan, I've got one I'm going to throw your way because I think it's kind of an interesting perspective. It's talking about safety and reducing traffic volume, which is interesting. This person, Robbie, is thinking that fewer drivers equals fewer faster drivers, but my understanding is that that's not exactly what we're seeing on the ground today. Is that true from a safety perspective, Evan?
Thank you, Julie. I think there is some interesting dynamics that we are seeing right now on the ground. It could be kind of an experiment or a lab for how this new normal scenario might play. Certainly, I think we can agree that slower traffic might be safer traffic in terms of fatalities or serious injuries. While there might be more crashes overall, they might be a little bit less severe. I think there was a great comment in here that the new normal kind of exposed some of the flaws in our street design that really does allow and encourage the fastest vehicle travel possible through our communities. And I think that's what we're seeing is Denver has hit kind of a record in terms of fatalities in 2021 since over the past decade or more. And that's certainly why we're suggesting that safety might be less safe in this scenario overall. Again, recognizing that if nothing else changes, we might actually see faster drivers overall, even if there are fewer cars.
Terrific, thank you. A couple of additional other comments before we move on to our next one. Needs safe, connected, easy to navigate bike and pedestrian routes. I think we've heard that quite a bit, and then obviously addresses some safety concerns that have also raised in the chat as well. So appreciate that feedback. Again, investing a little bit more in transit so that there are options. There's interesting discussion about incentivizing people to make better choices. How do we encourage folks to, providing these options, but then how do we encourage folks? Sam, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as we're looking, especially at the new normal scenario, what could we do to meet our goals in terms of not just making this all car centric, not just, providing some of those multimodal options. How would we balance that under this scenario, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think somebody put in the chat this sentiment that, if you build it, they will come. They being new people riding, walking, taking the bus, taking the train. But the recognition that we have as a city is that the infrastructure alone, so providing a better service, doesn't necessarily always relate one-to-one to new trips. It's really about those programs that help people to recognize that that new service is available, that it's faster, that it's safer, that it's more convenient, and demonstrating that, and also going the next step to incentivize that, working with employers. And there's a whole host of programs such as, encouraging children to walk or bike to school or take the bus to school, known as Safe Routes to School programming. So DOTI as an organization wants to make more concerted investments in those other programs, which help to support our infrastructure investments to help to change behavior and to demonstrate that these new options are available and that they're safe and convenient and comfortable. So all of those suite of programs is kind of a technical term called transportation demand management. And through Denver Moves Everyone, we want to understand what level of investment in those programs is necessary to support what we call our infrastructure investments, and then to invest in those in parallel, so that in the future we're always thinking about how can we support behavior change, which is really instrumental towards achieving our goals of this plan.
Terrific, thank you. Well, and we've got a couple of specific suggestions too in the chat about rebates for e-bikes and maybe a little bit more enforcement around stopping bike theft. So those are some very proactive suggestions. We appreciate that.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah. Thanks for those great ideas. Absolutely, those are the things we need to be thinking about in the future. E-bikes, as an example, didn't exist 10 years ago. The prices are coming down. E-bikes represent elimination of a barrier that a lot of folks had. They didn't want to get hot when they were bicycling, but it really, in folks who don't have the same, really can travel longer distances. So how can we incentivize e-bikes into the future? And looking across to other cities in Europe or even in Asia, where they have much higher rates of e-bicycling, something that we should definitely investigate through this plan.
Terrific, thank you. Well, with that, again, hit *3 with questions and any thoughts for us. I think we're going to move to our third scenario. Alana, do you want to talk to us about Walkable and Green?
Sure, thanks, Julie. All right, so our third scenario is called Walkable and Green. And this scenario really looks at a big transformation in how people get around the city and what our streets look like. So if we dig in here, really in this scenario, a lot fewer people are driving because we've made a big investment in buses and trains. They come more frequently, they're more reliable. It's easier and safer to walk or bike. So some people are still driving and certainly driving for certain trips, but a lot of those vehicles are electric in this scenario, so they're not contributing so much to climate change and air pollution, and there just really are fewer cars on the road. So that gets at a question of safety. In this scenario, we would need to design our streets so that the fewer cars are going slower and it is safe to bike and walk. And those are really the big changes in this scenario, is shifting people to other options besides just having to rely on a personal vehicle.
Terrific, thank you. So questions about Walkable and Green. And then again, similar to the other scenarios, we'd love to know what is exciting to you about this and what would you see as challenges under this future scenario. So Walkable and Green. So again, hit *3 if you're on the phone, or feel free to getting some great feedback in the chat. We really appreciate it. One suggestion while we're getting into the Walkable and Green feedback, we had a suggestion from Robert that DOTI should just build out a super awesome protected bike network and just buy people e-bikes. And then that would drive a significant change. That's great. We love these big ideas, keep them coming in, because it's the future and we need to get on board before we get stuck behind in more pollution and higher transportation costs. So appreciate that feedback. So we also have a comment that it feels like the only viable alternative for climate goals and Vision Zero. So Alana, I might get your thoughts on this one. Again, this is one of our plausible futures, but isn't our goal to make sure that we're achieving our climate goals and Vision Zero under any of these scenarios?
Sure. So as Afor showed earlier, one of the major goals for this plan that we want to meet is sustainability and addressing climate change. So that is a goal that we'd want to meet through the strategies, but some of these scenarios and futures would make it harder to do that. I also think there are a couple ways we could do that. In the next scenario, we'll look a little bit more less about changing if people are driving, but what types of cars they're driving. And if there were a lot of electric cars, maybe you can reduce emissions that way. But this certainly in our initial analysis does get us the closest to really addressing climate change in a meaningful way by providing zero emission options for more people and reducing the pollution from vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Terrific, thank you. We also have a suggestion, investment in trees along the streets and bikeable to making just the non-car experience more comfortable, and that would also help pollution and urban heat islands. So appreciate that feedback. Evan, I've got a question for you. So under the scenario, we have a question Bruce is asking, so under the scenario, we have fewer cars as well, but yet we're assuming they're at slower speeds. So can you describe kind of this one as compared to what we were seeing previously in the new normal scenario?
Sure. Thank you, Julie. And again, we're kind of making some broad assumptions of what this future might be to really, again, help us plan for how we can meet our goals in each of these scenarios, regardless of how the future turns out. So in this scenario, this is really building out that infrastructure that we all want. So there should be more people moving around our city, sharing those streets. And so ideally, if we make those transformative investments that do make it a little less convenient to drive around, we should see slower speeds overall. We could see more expensive parking in downtown, really significant policies that do charge for the miles we drive or the carbon we emit. So we really ideally might see much more activity going on in our city, and then slower speeds overall.
Mm-hmm. Terrific, thank you. Some other good comments coming in. Reminder that electric vehicles are still vehicles. So if our goal is to get vehicles off the road, we need to address those as well. Great point. Sam, I think I'm gonna hand this one off to you. There's a question from Sean saying, I'm surprised that we're assuming this is more expensive. So, change costs money and big changes cost more money, but given, what the kind of money we're spending in status quo, for example, updating I-70 Broadway intersection, that could go a long way toward bike paths and public transit. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one for us, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. So the funding changes across these scenarios are really to demonstrate how much revenue that we have to invest in our transportation system. So what this this future demonstrates is that we think we would actually have more funding to maintain our transportation system compared to some of the other ones. And that's really related to growth. So what Walkable and Green also we're trying to understand is, what if places in Denver became closer together, that we had a larger population? And sales tax is the thing currently that is used primarily to fund our general fund, which then funds transportation as an organization. And so we're thinking that if Denver did become a bigger city in this scenario, we would actually have more funding compared to, for instance, the future that Afor presented, the new normal. We might actually see Denver not growing as much, more people saying, hey, I can live anywhere. And you'll also see that played out in the next scenario. And if we had less revenue coming in, we fundamentally have less funding available to invest in our transportation system.
Perfect, thank you. So we have some other comments. Scott saying Walkable and Green seems most compatible with the goals that were set for Blueprint Denver. So I think that's a great observation. appreciate that you've read Blueprint Denver. We love that. See, we had some questions about, the ability of Excel transformers to handle solar panels and EV charging. I think that's a good thing we'll put into our consideration as we move forward. And it's actually a nice transition to our fourth scenario. Going to hand it over to Sam, I believe. Sorry, I can remember who was doing this one, to talk about technology driven.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And thanks for the other folks who presented their scenario. So again, this one is not necessarily something we want to happen, but it could. What if self-driving cars became common in Denver in the future? We want to know what you think about that. And so some of the changes that we could see. So self-driving cars, and we're using information that we have available today. There's been analysis to demonstrate that if you have a self-driving car, right now, as you drive, it may be frustrating to be stuck in traffic because you have to be focused on that trip. But in a self-driving car, what the research suggests is that you could multitask, you could do other things, and driving and traveling wouldn't be as much of a drag as it is today to be stuck in traffic. So we want to think about what impact that could have on travel. Would people actually drive more if we had self-driving cars? The factors that contribute to serious injuries and crashes today are primarily the result of human behavior. It's speeding, it's not wearing a seatbelt, or it's being under the influence. And so self-driving cars theoretically could help on the safety front. Could they actually be safer than having people behind the wheel, so to speak? And sustainability, could these vehicles, if they're the state of the art, most large auto manufacturers are making commitments to make their entire fleets, or a significant majority of their fleets, electric by 2030, 2040, 2050. So looking over the horizon of this plan, we could anticipate that if these were the state-of-the-art vehicles, they'd likely be electric as well. Could that have an impact on our climate in our environment? People could probably live further out. So that's why the transportation funding bucket goes down. But we don't exactly know what's going to happen. We want to understand what you think about self-driving cars. Are they good, or are they not so good for Denver?
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. So we're already starting to get there's some strong opinions in the chat. No more cars, self-driving or not. Absolutely understand that feedback. A lot of feedback around, if we're going to have self-driving cars, what about our protected infrastructure? Those individuals that are biking or pedestrians in a self-driving car, what can DOTI do to protect them? And so, Sam, is that something that DOTI would be considering, as maybe more protected infrastructure under this scenario? I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, one of the things we've heard a lot about as we've started to talk about this technology-driven future is that if you'd have more cars, well, what about the people that are still walking, bicycling, taking transit? Are they kind of, they may experience more conflicts with those vehicles, even if they're equipped with smart technology that minimizes crashes. And so it's really important for us to think through, well, what do we want in terms of self-driving cars, as well as what the impacts could be on people on our streets.
That's an excellent point. Alana, I have a question for you. I'm not sure of the answer in this. It says, are we also looking at alternative road construction? From what I understand, asphalt is a big carbon contributor. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Sure, thank you. Yes, DOTI is looking into ways to make our infrastructure more sustainable. So creating less carbon emissions while creating the materials. And then I think also when we think about climate change and the impacts that we know are coming, how do we make the infrastructure more resilient? So can it withstand extreme heat days? Can it help reduce stormwater? So that's sort of long-term thinking about the impacts to the system through our infrastructure.
Terrific, thank you. Some really good points here. If self-driving cars make driving better, encouraging longer commutes, more driving, and still require, all the sorts of investment in road infrastructure. So there's certainly from Austin a thought that, this actually could exacerbate some of our problems with the volume of vehicles on the road. So I think that's a really interesting point. Also, another point, if in the autonomous vehicles future, we would absolutely have to prohibit empty driving of AVs to prevent our streets from becoming gridlocked. So I think that's a really good point. If you have a lot of AVs that don't have people in them, again, there's a scenario where this could exacerbate problems. So we really appreciate that perspective as you move forward, because obviously there is a lot of unknowns right now when we're looking into the future. So we appreciate your perspectives. Questions from Robert that, are mass self-driving car fleets even possible? And I think there are some questions. I think that's a good point about the viability and the safety of these vehicles. I think, maybe that's a question for Evan, as DOTI moves forward, what sort of things, or what sort of information and data should DOTI be gathering to make sure that this information, to make sure that we are understanding the impacts of autonomous vehicles in the future?
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. And 30 years ago, we really didn't have many of the innovations that we've had today. Whether or not it's really plausible to have fully autonomous vehicles in a fleet, it's still certainly a question, and this is the kind of bounds of plausibility. But again, we're not planning for this future to happen, but if it were to happen, we'd like to be prepared, and we'd like to understand some of the negatives, impacts of this overall. And I think there's some great comments here about, introducing some regulations of where those vehicles might be, how they might travel, discouraging private ownership of those. There may also be some positives. I think there might be an opportunity here for, if you wanted to get rid of your car altogether, this would be one way that you might be able to share a vehicle overall. I think that's a sentiment maybe shared by some of our panelists. So there might be some other things here as well. And so it's really a technology-driven future. It's also maybe a little bit less about the vehicles themselves, but this is a scenario where Denver is much more spread out, and where we're really unable to provide some of those services overall within the city. So lots to unpack and think about here. Some great comments coming in overall.
Terrific, thank you. Alana, did you have anything to add about that, especially this concept of wanting to get rid of your car altogether and maybe sharing a vehicle?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting comment that we got in the chat about somebody wanting to give up a car. And in this scenario, if we have autonomous vehicles, one scenario is that they're really expensive to own, and people still have to own their individual cars. And that would have implications on equity, like we were talking about earlier, and just the cost of making ends meet and getting around. But another scenario is that they are shared, and we figure out a system where not everyone has to own them, but they come when you need them, but you also have other options. So I think there are ways that self-driving cars could be integrated, but also a lot of concerns here about what it could look like on the other end. So to Evan's point, being prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. Terrific, thank you. Well, we've only got about 10 minutes left, so we have a couple of polling questions. So I'd like to get to those next because we want to hear from you. So moving forward, so for those of you on Zoom, you're going to have a Zoom poll that's just going to pop up. And then for those of you on the phone, so the first question is, how do you think each of the 4 futures would impact your overall quality of life? So for example, so press 1 for worse off than today. Press 2 for slightly worse off. Press 3 for no difference. Press 4 for slightly better off, and press 5 for better off than today.
Oh, and Julie, I think they're just asking.
For which of the futures? Okay, so let's take them one at a time. So I think that we'll start with new normal. So for new normal, what would you think? Press 1 for worse off than today, 2 for slightly worse off, 3 for no difference, 4 for slightly better off, or 5 for better off than today. So that is question 1. And again, let us know, hit *3 if you're having trouble, and you can actually share that as well. And then Lucy, we need to repeat this question for the other scenarios. So if you can put it back up, and we will do walkable and green. So give 1 second. Okay, so for walkable and green, again, you have the Zoom poll in front of you if you're on the Zoom, or you hit from 1 through 5. So 1 is worse off than today. And again, this is for the new walkable and green. So for walkable and green, number 1 is worse off than today. 2 is slightly worse off. 3, no difference. 4, slightly better off, or 5, better off than today for walkable and green. So again, or hit *3 if that's not working. You can also provide us feedback. So we'll give it one more minute. And then we've got our last question would be on the technology driven that we just discussed with Sam. So this is walkable and green. Now we're on our final one for question 1, which is for technology driven, the one we were just discussing. Again, respond to the Zoom poll, or if you are on the phone, 1 for worse off today for technology driven, 2 slightly worse off, 3 no difference, 4 slightly better off, or 5 better off than today. Great. And again, hit *3 if you just want to provide the feedback. All right, so now we thank you for this feedback. So now for question 2, we're going to do those 3 again, but now we'd like you to put yourself in the place of a different citizen. So what if you put yourself in the place of somebody who is a lower income resident and you're thinking about these scenarios? So the first one we're going to do is the new normal. So again, the choices are going to be the same for each of these, but again, you're putting yourself in the place of a lower income resident. So for the new normal scenario, which is sort of accelerating the pandemic, again, worse off today, number 1, slightly worse off, number 2, no difference, number 3, slightly better off, number 4, and better off than today is number 5. And again, this is for the new normal scenario, thinking about the impact of lower income residents. Please let us know your thoughts. And again, hit *3 if you want to provide us additional feedback, or put comments in the chat. I love it. The comments are still coming in. We love it. Same question again. We're going to pop up the next question, but again, it is for the so the walkable and green scenario. So under the walkable and green scenario, again, thinking of putting yourself in the place of a lower income resident, what do you think? Number 1, worse off. 2, slightly worse off. 3, no difference. 4, slightly better off, and 5 better off today. So again, this is walkable and green. And then we've got one more version of this. Great, thank you for your feedback. So now we're into the technology driven. So again, putting yourself in the place of a lower income resident, when you think about that technology driven scenario, what do you think? Do you think you'd be worse off today? Number 1, on your phone. 2, slightly worse off. 3, no difference. 4, slightly better off. Or 5, better off than today. And again, this is technology driven. And let us know if you have questions in the chat. And then we've got one more round of these. We'll go through them quickly. So now we're thinking, okay, how would you take each of these future heroes?
Julie?
Yes, please.
Wondering if we might just encourage comments in the chat rather than going through a third question here.
Sure, absolutely. Would love to hear. Any comments in the chat? What do you think? Or hit *3 on the phone and provide your feedback. So how do you think each of the 4 futures would impact somebody who experiences transportation a little differently? Youth, older adults, residents. So how would you think? I'd love your feedback in the chat, or hit *3 and just let us know. Again, what do you think? Would that be any different for youth, older adults, and residents? Love to hear your feedback. And with that, as you're thinking about that, we've got a couple of slides left. We've only got about 5 minutes left. So Sam, love to have you jump in and just kind of take us home.
So where do we go from here? I just wanted to emphasize that we have more questions about the scenarios at denvermoveseveryone.com. And so we are curious to hear your responses to those additional ones. If you've got the time, please check that out. And again, if you could help to share that across your networks, we'd so appreciate it. This has been a really helpful conversation tonight. We're really, wanting to understand your perspectives on what changes could happen so that we can really think about what we want to invest in the programs and services we want to have on deck so that we can build the transportation system we want. So all of the feedback that you gave is really helpful to orient our work as we think about the future. So where do we go in terms of our next steps for the project? So as I talked about when we first kicked off, we have 2 major milestones left for Denver Moves Everyone. We're collecting over the next couple of months feedback on these scenarios about what are our preferences for the future? What should we be focused on? What should we be prioritizing? And then we'll take all of that information, and then behind the scenes, we're making some calculations of what changes we could actually see if these futures were to come. And we'll come back to you and to the broader public to demonstrate what those impacts could be and use that information to really prioritize projects, programs, and services, both in the short term as well as in the long term. So keep an eye out for hearing from us again in the early winter of next year. And then we'll ask for your feedback one more time as we really start to dial in those projects and those recommendations based on your thoughts about where we should prioritize our resources and the trade-offs. So, and we want to know from you, how can we be more accountable? How can we track progress of this plan? So just know that your ideas inform this plan, and we have 2 more exciting opportunities to engage with you. So please stay tuned.
Terrific.
And we have a lot of ways for you all to participate. So check out our website, denvergov.org, bit.ly/Denver Moves Everyone, and then denvermoveseveryone.com is where all of our engagement websites are hosted. So that's where you can go learn about the surveys. And maybe Julie, we could just drop that URL in the chat so people have easy access to the website. So, and for folks on the phone, that's www.denvermoveseveryone.com. Please check that out. We've got pop-up events, we've got an email, we've got a project hotline. So these are all great ways to get in touch with us. Julie, anything else on that?
I think it's just telling everybody, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts. We've had a lot of great engagement tonight. And again, www.denvermoveseveryone.com. We would love your thoughts on that. That is that there's a lot of great fun history information, and we would love your thoughts on it. So really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. We appreciate all the feedback.
Thank
Talk to
you.
you
Good
soon.
night.
Bye.